My grandson called me at 6 in the morning and said, "Grandpa, whatever you do, don't wear your brown cowboy hat today." I asked why, and with a voice filled with fear, he said, "Please just trust me. You'll understand soon." At 9:00 a.m., I drove to the feed store. When I arrived, I froze in place the moment I saw what was unfolding there. Little did I know that my grandson's warning had just saved my life. This story will shock you from start to finish. Drop a comment below telling me your location and whether you trust family warnings, even when they don't make sense. The phone's shrill ring cut through the pre-dawn quiet of my bedroom at exactly 6:15. At 63, I'd learned to wake with the sun, but this was different, urgent, the kind of call that makes your heart skip before you even answer. "Hello?" My voice came out rougher than expected. "Grandpa, whatever you do, don't wear your brown cowboy hat today." Jasper's voice trembled through the speaker, tight with fear I'd never heard from my 19-year-old grandson. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "Why, what's wrong? Where are you?" "Please just trust me. You'll understand soon." The line went dead before I could ask another question. I stared at the phone in my weathered hands, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Jasper had always been level-headed, the kind of kid who thought before he spoke. If he was scared enough to call at dawn with a warning like that, something was seriously wrong. Walking to my closet, I flicked on the light and examined the hat rack. Both of my brown cowboy hats hung exactly where I'd left them the night before. The work hat beaten and stained from years of ranch labor, and the Sunday hat with its distinctive silver concho and eagle feather I'd found on a hunting trip 20 years back. They were identical except for where both gifts from my late wife Martha, who'd insisted a proper rancher needed proper hats. I couldn't fathom why Jasper would warn me away from either one, but 45 years of raising children and grandchildren had taught me when to trust without question. This was one of those times. Instead of my usual hat, I grabbed the old baseball cap hanging behind the door. It felt strange on my head as I made my way downstairs to start the coffee. The Fletcher Ranch had been in our family for 4 generations, and morning routines were sacred here. Coffee first, then a walk through the barn to check on the cattle, followed by whatever the day demanded. But today felt different. Jasper's call had left an uneasiness in my chest that even the familiar ritual couldn't shake. As I sipped my coffee and watched the Montana sunrise paint the mountains gold, I kept replaying his words, the terror in his voice, the way he'd hung up so abruptly. By 8:30, I'd finished my rounds. The cattle were fine, the barn secure, everything as it should be. I had planned to drive into Bozeman to pick up feed supplements at the supply store, a monthly trip I'd been making for 15 years. Today seemed like any other day for that errand except for the nagging worry about my grandson. I climbed into my pickup truck, a reliable Ford that had seen better decades, but still ran strong. The baseball cap felt foreign as I adjusted the rearview mirror, and I caught myself reaching for the brown hat that wasn't there. Whatever Jasper was afraid of, I hoped I'd understand soon enough. The drive into Bozeman took 30 minutes through rolling hills dotted with ranches like mine. I'd made this trip countless times, knew every curve and landmark. The Bozeman Feed and Supply sat on the edge of town, a sprawling building where ranchers gathered to talk weather, cattle prices, and local news. But as I turned into the parking lot at 9 o'clock sharp, my routine morning took a sharp turn into something else entirely. Police cars lined the street, their red and blue lights painting the gray morning in urgent colors. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the front of the building where I'd planned to buy feed. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, neighbors and strangers alike craning their necks to see what had happened. I parked as close as I could and walked toward the commotion, my heart beginning to race with a dread I couldn't name. Something terrible had happened here. The crowd of onlookers parted reluctantly as I pushed through my rancher's instincts, telling me to get closer to whatever had drawn all these people. That's when I spotted Sheriff Tobias Crane near the yellow tape, his weathered face grim as he supervised the scene. Toby and I had gone to high school together 45 years ago, back when Bozeman was half the size it is now. "Toby," I called out, and he turned toward me with recognition and something else in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or concern. "Garrison, what brings you down here this morning?" His voice carried the weight of someone who'd been dealing with something serious for hours. "Monthly feed run," I said, gesturing toward the store behind the tape. "What happened?" Before he could answer, I caught sight of a familiar figure sitting on the tailgate of a patrol car, about 20 yards away. Jasper sat hunched forward, his shoulders shaking, while a female officer offered him tissues. The sight of my grandson in obvious distress sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the February morning. That's why I'm glad you're here, Toby said, following my gaze. We called your grandson about an hour ago. Last number dialed on the victim's phone was his. Victim. The word hit me like a physical blow. Young woman, probably late 20s. Body was discovered around 4 this morning by the delivery driver. Coroner estimates time of death around 1 a.m. Toby's professional demeanor couldn't quite mask the fact that he was watching my reaction carefully. I started walking toward Jasper, but Toby's hand on my arm stopped me. Garrison, there's something else. Something that might explain why your grandson called you this morning. He led me closer to where the body had been found, though it had already been removed. What I saw made my blood run cold. Lying on the ground in a clear evidence bag was a brown cowboy hat, identical to mine, down to the smallest detail. The silver concho gleamed in the morning light, and I could make out the distinctive eagle feather tucked into the band. That hat, I whispered, my voice barely audible. It's identical to mine, down to every detail. That's what your grandson said when he got here. Broke down completely when he saw it. Toby studied my face. How did he know to warn you about wearing yours today? Before I could process the implications, Jasper appeared at my elbow. His eyes were red-rimmed and wild with grief. Grandpa, he choked out. That's Genevieve Shaw. She was my girlfriend. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Your girlfriend was wearing a hat identical to mine. Jasper nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve. Last week I saw Joyce at the ranch. She was in the barn and she had your Sunday hat in her hands. When I asked what she was doing, she said she wanted to use it as a sample to buy an identical one for Dad's birthday next month. My mind raced. Joyce Drake. My daughter-in-law for 15 years had borrowed my hat under the pretense of buying Dominic a gift. Now a young woman was dead, wearing what appeared to be an exact replica of that same hat. She had access, I said more to myself than to anyone else. Joyce had access to my hat, and now someone's dead wearing one just like it. Toby finished. Garrison, I need to ask you directly. Where were you between midnight and 2 this morning? At home asleep. Alone. The implications of his question settled over me like a heavy blanket. Toby, you can't possibly think... I don't think anything yet. But I need to understand why a murder victim was dressed to look like you, and why your grandson knew enough to warn you away from wearing that hat this morning. Jasper grabbed my arm. Grandpa, I swear I didn't know this would happen. When Genevieve called me last night, she sounded scared. She said she had something important to tell me, but then the line went dead. When the police called this morning and said they'd found her, an officer approached us holding an evidence bag containing what looked like official documents. Sheriff, she called out, you need to see what was in her pocket. Toby took the bag, examined its contents, and his expression darkened considerably. He looked up at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Suspicion. Garrison, we need to talk. The evidence bag contained what looked like official legal documents, neatly folded and sealed in plastic. Toby held it up to the morning light, and I could make out letterhead and signatures through the clear material. Property deed, he said, his voice flat. Transferring the Fletcher Ranch to Dominic Fletcher and Joyce Drake for the sum of $1. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? Dated 3 weeks ago. Notarized and witnessed. Your signature looks authentic, Garrison. Toby's eyes never left my face. This gives your son and daughter-in-law legal ownership of a $3.2 million property. I stared at the document, my mind racing. I never signed this. That's not... Or is it... Then the memory flooded back like ice water. 3 weeks ago, Sunday dinner at the ranch. Joyce had spread papers across the kitchen table after dessert, chattering about insurance updates and tax forms. Just sign here, Dad, she'd said with that bright smile. Boring paperwork, but it protects the family. I'd signed without reading, trusting her completely. This gives them legal ownership, Toby continued. Motive for murder if someone was trying to frame you for killing the one person who might expose the forgery. The implications crashed over me. Someone had murdered Genevieve Shaw, dressed her to look like me, and planted evidence of a forged property transfer. The perfect setup to eliminate both a witness and the rightful owner in one stroke. I need to get home, I said, my voice hoarse. The drive back to the ranch felt like the longest 30 minutes of my life. Every turn in the familiar road seemed foreign, every landmark strange. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Joyce's white Lexus sat parked near the front porch like it belonged there. Through the kitchen window, I could see movement inside my house. I found her in my study going through my filing cabinet with methodical precision. Papers were scattered across my desk, and she had a manila folder in her hands when I walked in. "What are you doing in my house?" She spun around, startled, but quickly recovering her composure. "Garrison, thank goodness you're home. I was looking for documents to help you with these legal issues. Insurance papers, tax records, anything that might prove your innocence." "How did you know about legal issues? I just left the crime scene 20 minutes ago." Her smile faltered for just a moment. "Dominic called. He heard about the incident downtown. We're family, we stick together during crisis." I stepped closer, noting how she'd positioned herself between me and my own filing cabinet. "Joyce, did you manipulate me into signing that property deed?" "What deed? I don't know what you're talking about." But her eyes had gone cold, calculating. The warm daughter-in-law mask was slipping. "The one that transfers my ranch to you and Dominic for $1. The one they found on a murder victim who was dressed to look like me." For a long moment we stared at each other across the desk that had belonged to my father and his father before him. 4 generations of Fletcher family business, and she'd been going through it like she owned the place. "Maybe," she said finally, "someone did you a favor. This ranch is a burden you can't handle anymore. You're 63 years old, living alone, making poor decisions. Maybe it's time to let the younger generation take over." The casual cruelty in her voice was like a slap. This woman had sat at my table for 15 years, had called me dad, had been part of every holiday and family celebration. And now she was standing in my study, having gone through my private papers, telling me I was too old to manage my own life. The sound of an expensive car engine in the driveway cut through the tension. Through the window, I watched a black Mercedes pull up behind Joyce's Lexus. A man in a $1,000 suit stepped out carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Joyce's smile returned sharp and confident. Perfect timing. The man who entered my study commanded attention immediately. Reginald Thorne moved with practiced confidence, his tailored suit announcing success before he spoke. He set his briefcase on my desk with deliberate precision. "Mr. Fletcher, I'm attorney for Mrs. Joyce Drake. There's been confusion regarding legal documents and unfortunate accusations against my client." "No confusion," I said. "She manipulated me into signing away my ranch." Thorne smiled like a shark. "That's exactly the paranoid thinking that concerns us. Mrs. Drake has filed for a competency hearing. We believe you're suffering from age-related cognitive decline affecting your judgment." He withdrew a thick folder. "Elderly man making wild accusations about family claiming conspiracies, exhibiting erratic behavior. The court will see a concerned daughter-in-law protecting family assets." Joyce moved beside him, her mask of concern replaced by cold calculation. "We're doing this for your own good, Dad. Additionally, Mrs. Drake holds power of attorney documents. Should the court find you incompetent, she assumes full control of your assets, medical decisions, and living arrangements." The implications hit like a physical blow. "You planned this." "We plan to protect a vulnerable elderly man from poor decisions," Joyce said. "This ranch is worth $3.2 million. That's dangerous in the wrong hands." The front door opened. Dominic appeared, taking in the scene with confusion. My son looked older than his 42 years. "What's going on, Joyce? Why is your lawyer here?" "Your father's making serious accusations," Thorne explained. "We're discussing legal protection for everyone." Dominic looked between his wife and me, clearly torn. "Dad, maybe we should consider... You're getting older, and this ranch is a lot of work." "You two." The betrayal cut deeper than Joyce's cruelty. $5 million defamation lawsuit. Mandatory psychiatric evaluation, supervised living, Joyce said. "Easy way or hard way?" Thorne nodded. "Montana law protects family members acting in good faith to assist elderly relatives who can no longer manage affairs." I felt my own home's walls closing in. The ranch my great-grandfather homesteaded was about to be stolen through legal manipulation. My phone buzzed. "Stop fighting or lose everything you love." Before I could process it, another text from Jasper. "Meet old grain mill midnight. Cattle roundup summer." My blood ran cold. Cattle roundup summer was our emergency code from when he was 12, something he'd only use if his life was in real danger. "Gentlemen, this conversation is over." Thorne's smile never wavered. "You have 48 hours to reconsider. After that, we proceed with all legal remedies to protect Mrs. Drake's interests and ensure your proper care." As they gathered papers, Joyce whispered close to my ear, "You have no idea what you're up against, old man." But looking at Jasper's text, I understood this went far beyond property theft. My grandson was in danger, and our survival depended on secrets that could only be shared in an abandoned grain mill's darkness. The old grain mill stood like a skeleton against the star-filled Montana sky, its broken windows staring blindly across the Gallatin River. I'd driven here without headlights for the last mile following a dirt road I remembered from hunting trips decades ago. The mill had been abandoned since the 80s, a relic of better times when small operations could still compete. Jasper sat hunched on a concrete loading dock, his silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. When he heard my footsteps on the gravel, he looked up with eyes that seemed far older than his 19 years. "Grandpa," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I think I helped get her killed." I sat beside him on the cold concrete, feeling the weight of whatever truth had brought us to this desolate place. "Tell me everything. Genevieve wasn't just some college girl I met randomly." His words came out in ragged bursts. "Tuesday night, she called me around 10:30. She was excited but scared, said she'd finally found solid evidence about something big. Had it all organized in her apartment. Evidence about what she wouldn't say over the phone, just that it involved Joyce and other people, something about elderly property owners. She said she was going to confront someone the next morning with proof of everything." Jasper wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "When the police called me about her death, I went to her apartment. The door was unlocked, like someone had been there before me. The place looked searched, but they'd missed something." "What did you find?" "Behind her bedroom mirrors, she'd hidden files. Bank records, property transfers, death certificates. Names and dates going back years." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "Martha Whitmore was one of them. An elderly woman who owned a ranch outside Red Lodge. Property transferred to a development company. Then she died in a house fire 6 months later. The name meant nothing to me, but the pattern was chilling. How many others? 11 that I could count, maybe more. All elderly property owners across Montana, Wyoming, even into Idaho. All had their land transferred through legal documents, then died within a year. Heart attacks, accidents, house fires. My grandson pulled out a small thumb drive. I copied everything before someone came back. Genevieve had been investigating this for years, Grandpa. I think she discovered Joyce was part of some kind of operation that targets elderly landowners. And you think Joyce killed her to keep it quiet? The hat, Grandpa. That's how I knew to warn you." Jasper's voice dropped to a whisper. "In Genevieve's notes, she wrote about how they frame their victims sometimes. Make it look like the elderly person committed crimes before they die. When I saw Joyce take your hat last week and then heard about the murder, the pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Joyce hadn't borrowed my hat for Dominic's birthday. She'd stolen it to plant at a crime scene to make it look like I'd killed the one person who could expose her operation. She was going to frame me for murder, then have me declared incompetent. No, I think so. Perfect setup. Eliminate the witness and the current victim in one move." Jasper pressed the thumb drive into my hand. "But Genevieve was smarter than they thought. She documented everything. We need to get this to Sheriff Crane. Can we trust him? Genevieve's files mention payments to law enforcement officials. We don't know how deep this goes." The sound of vehicles approaching made us both freeze, multiple engines moving slowly without headlights, just as I had. But these weren't friends coming to help. "They followed us," Jasper whispered. Footsteps crunched on gravel outside the mill, and I heard voices conferring in low tones. At least 3 people, maybe more. We were trapped in a building with no back exit, surrounded by whoever Joyce had sent to clean up her loose ends. Through a broken window, I could see flashlight beams sweeping the area. Professional, methodical. These weren't amateurs. "Grandpa—" Jasper breathed, his hand shaking as he reached into his jacket. "There's something else. Genevieve's phone. She was recording when it happened. Mr. Fletcher, we know you're in there." Joyce's voice echoed through the abandoned mill, with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. Jasper and I pressed ourselves against the concrete wall as footsteps approached the main entrance. Through gaps in the rotting wood, I could see flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. "There's nowhere to run, Garrison. Come out and we can discuss this like civilized people." The mill's main door creaked open and Joyce stepped inside, flanked by 3 men. I recognized Deputy Tristan Fox, immediately his uniform and badge lending false authority to what was clearly criminal business. The other 2 were strangers, large men in dark clothing who moved with the practiced ease of hired muscle. "You're trespassing on private property," Joyce announced, her voice carrying across the empty space. "That evidence belongs to my legal team, and you're interfering with an ongoing investigation." Deputy Fox stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his weapon. "This is official police business. You're obstructing justice by hiding evidence in a murder case. I almost laughed at the audacity. They were going to arrest us for possessing evidence of their own crimes. Garrison, I know you can hear me. Joyce continued, walking deeper into the mill. I've been planning your elimination for 2 years, old man. Did you really think you could outsmart an operation this sophisticated? Her confidence was staggering. Here she was confessing to murder, and conspiracy apparently certain that no one would ever hear her words. 11 properties across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. $50 million in development deals. Your little ranch was just the latest acquisition in a very profitable enterprise. Jasper's grip tightened on my arm as Joyce's voice grew closer. She was enjoying this, savoring her moment of triumph. Genevieve was supposed to be simple. Use naive little Jasper to gather information, forge the necessary documents, arrange a convenient accident for the stubborn grandfather. Clean, efficient, profitable. But she got ambitious, didn't she? Started playing detective, thinking she was smarter than people who'd been perfecting this system for years. She threatened to destroy careful work, decades of planning. Deputy Fox chuckled. Should have minded her own business. I had to eliminate her before she ruined everything. Joyce said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. The hat was perfect. Frame you for her murder, then use your obvious guilt and deteriorating mental state to justify the competency hearing. 2 problems solved with 1 solution. No witnesses this time, Fox added, unlike some of the other cleanups we've handled. The casual admission of multiple murders sent ice through my veins. These people had been killing elderly landowners for years, and law enforcement had been helping cover it up. You're just another greedy old fool who got in the way of progress, Joyce said. Montana's changing, Garrison. People like you clinging to the past, holding up development that could benefit entire communities. We're doing a service, really. Her footsteps were getting closer. In moments, they'd find our hiding spot behind the old grain conveyor. But Joyce's arrogance was about to become her downfall. I pulled out my phone, making sure the screen was clearly visible, and stood up from behind the machinery. Joyce, I said calmly, I've been live streaming everything for the past 10 minutes. The mill fell silent except for the sound of the river outside. Joyce stared at my phone, her confident expression flickering with the first hint of uncertainty. You're lying, she said, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. I held the phone higher, showing her the active recording indicator and the viewer count climbing steadily. Sheriff Crane, the state police, and about 300 other people have been listening to every word you just said. Deputy Fox reached for his gun, but Joyce held up a hand to stop him. Her face had transformed completely, the mask of civilized businesswoman, replaced by something cold and desperate. Nobody's that smart, she snarled. Especially not some washed-up rancher who can't even manage his own affairs. Maybe not, I said. But my granddaughter taught me how to use Facebook Live last Christmas. Amazing what you can learn when you're not too proud to listen. Joyce's confident facade crumbled, entirely replaced by pure rage. You have no idea what you've just done. The wail of sirens cut through the night air like a cavalry charge growing louder by the second. Through the mill's broken windows I could see red and blue lights painting the darkness as multiple vehicles surrounded the building. Sheriff Crane's voice boomed through a megaphone. This is the Montana State Police. The building is surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. Joyce's face went from rage to panic in an instant. This is impossible. You're bluffing. I held up my phone, showing her the live stream that now had over 1,000 viewers. Say hello to the internet, Joyce. The mill's main door exploded inward as Sheriff Crane led a team of state troopers through the entrance, weapons drawn and tactical lights cutting through the shadows. The sight of law enforcement flooding in was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in days. Nobody move, Crane commanded. Hands where we can see them. Deputy Fox reached for his weapon, but found himself staring down the barrels of 3 state trooper rifles. His shoulders sagged in defeat as he slowly raised his hands. Sheriff Crane, I called out, stepping into view with Jasper beside me. We have evidence you need to see. Within minutes, Joyce and Fox were handcuffed and read their rights. The 2 hired thugs tried to claim they were just security consultants, but their criminal records spoke otherwise. As they were led away, Joyce turned back to me with pure hatred in her eyes. This isn't over, old man. You have no idea how deep this goes. But she was wrong. Over the next 72 hours, the investigation exploded beyond anything I could have imagined. The thumb drive Jasper had found contained 6 years of meticulous record-keeping that would have made an accountant proud. Genevieve Shaw had documented everything. Bank transfers forged, signatures, property deeds, death certificates, and most damning of all, recorded phone conversations with Joyce planning various accidents. FBI agents arrived from Denver within hours, turning the case into a federal investigation spanning 3 states. Special Agent Sarah Martinez briefed me personally on what they'd discovered. 11 confirmed victims across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, she said, spreading photographs across the table at the sheriff's station. Elderly property owners, all with valuable land, all dead within months of signing transfer documents. Combined value of the stolen properties exceeds $50 million. The Summit Development Shell Company network unraveled like a cheap sweater. Reginald Thorne was arrested at his Billings office. His expensive suits no match for federal conspiracy charges. Bank records showed payments to at least 4 other law enforcement officials across the region. Deputy Fox, faced with life in prison, flipped faster than a pancake on Sunday morning. His testimony revealed a corruption network that had been operating for nearly a decade with Joyce as the mastermind and various officials providing legal cover. The media attention was overwhelming. CNN, Fox News, and every major network picked up the story. Largest elder fraud serial murder case in regional history became the headline that followed me everywhere. Reporters camped outside the ranch for weeks, but I had nothing more to say than what was already on that live stream. The victim families began reaching out within days. Martha Whitmore's surviving relatives, the Henderson family from Wyoming, the Kowalski estate from Idaho, 11 families who'd lost parents and grandparents to Joyce's greed, finally getting answers about deaths they'd never quite believed were accidental. The legal machinery moved swiftly. Joyce was denied bail entirely after prosecutors argued she was an extreme flight risk with access to offshore accounts. The competency hearing threats evaporated overnight, along with every forged document she'd created. Dominic filed for divorce the day after Joyce's arrest. He moved back to the ranch that week, his marriage of 15 years, reduced to legal paperwork and bitter memories. We didn't talk much about it at first, but I could see the relief in his eyes every morning when he woke up in his childhood bedroom. "I should have known," he said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "All those years, all the signs I ignored. She fooled a lot of people," I told him. "That's what made her dangerous." 6 months later, spring arrived at Fletcher Ranch with gentle warmth that made Montana winters seem distant. Cottonwoods budded green along the creek, and cattle lowed contentedly as I sat on my porch with morning coffee. Joyce Drake received life without parole. She'd testified against her entire network to avoid the death penalty, revealing corruption reaching into state and federal agencies. Watching her in that orange jumpsuit, stripped of designer clothes and confidence, I felt unexpected pity. She'd thrown away everything for money she'd never lived to spend. 4 corrupt officials received 15 to 25-year sentences. Summit Development's assets were seized and liquidated for victim restitution. Fletcher Ranch was officially secure, all fraudulent claims permanently dismissed. Dominic threw himself into ranch work with the dedication of a man making up for lost time. Every morning before dawn, he checked cattle-mended fences, learning operations he'd ignored during his marriage. "I forgot how much I loved this place," he said one evening, watching sunset behind the Bridger Mountains. "Joyce made me feel like it was a burden. But this is the better life, isn't it?" Jasper returned to college with new purpose. The trauma had matured him in ways I wished unnecessary. He'd changed his major to criminal justice, inspired by Genevieve's mission to protect people who can't protect themselves. I started wearing my brown cowboy hat again. For months after the trial, I couldn't bring myself to put it on, but one morning, I realized fear was just another way of letting Joyce win. Now I wore it with pride, a symbol of survival rather than vulnerability. Other elderly residents sought my advice about protecting themselves. I'd helped 3 neighbors review suspicious documents, and we'd started an informal network of ranchers checking on each other regularly. Genevieve Shaw was honored with a memorial scholarship fund at the community college for criminal justice students. Her sacrifice would continue protecting others long after her death. Sunday dinners became peaceful again. 3 generations of Fletcher men sharing stories, planning improvements, enjoying family time without hidden agendas or legal threats. Dominic's divorce finalized with minimal drama, since Joyce's conviction voided any marital claims. Media attention mostly died down, though I still received interview requests. I politely declined, most preferring quiet satisfaction of a life well lived to fleeting crime victim fame. As I sat on my porch that spring evening, watching light fade behind mountains, I reflected on the past year's lessons. Patience had outlasted aggression. Wisdom had defeated manipulation. Family bonds tested by betrayal and strengthened by crisis proved more durable than any legal document. At 63, I'd discovered being underestimated was actually an advantage. People like Joyce saw my age and assumed weakness, never recognizing strength that comes from decades of facing challenges and learning from mistakes. They mistook my quiet demeanor for confusion, my trust for gullibility, my kindness for foolishness. They were wrong about all of it. Fletcher Ranch would continue for another generation, maybe more. Dominic talked about improvements and sustainable practices. Jasper spoke of returning after college to help modernize while preserving traditions. The greatest battles are won not by the loudest voice, but by the wisest heart. Age isn't about what you've lost, but what you've gained. What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. Looking back at everything that happened, I realized God works in mysterious ways. When that phone rang at 6:15 that morning, I could never have imagined it would lead to exposing a network of killers who'd been preying on elderly folks for years. But the Lord has a way of using ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and I'm grateful He chose an old rancher like me to help bring justice. If you're watching this and thinking about your own family situation, let me give you some advice. Don't be like I was. Don't sign papers without reading them carefully, no matter who's asking. Don't assume family members always have your best interests at heart. And most importantly, don't let anyone convince you that your age makes you weak or incompetent. God gave us years of experience for a reason, and that wisdom is our greatest weapon against those who would take advantage of us. This true story taught me that patience really does outlast aggression. When Joyce and her lawyers tried to intimidate me with legal threats, I could have panicked or given up. Instead, I trusted in the Lord's timing and my grandson's love. Sometimes the best thing you can do is listen to the people who truly care about you, even when their warnings don't make sense at first. These grandpa stories might seem unbelievable, but every word is true. Evil exists in this world, often wearing a familiar face and speaking with a trusted voice. But good people still outnumber the bad ones, and the truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. The key is never giving up, even when the odds seem impossible. To all the grandparents out there sharing your own grandpa stories and true story experiences, your voice matters. Your wisdom matters. Your life experience is valuable, not something to be dismissed or manipulated by others. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that prove ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? Your stories inspire others to stay strong and fight for what's right. I received an unexpected call. Sir, I found something you need to see. Come alone. Don't tell your son. The photographer's trembling voice told me this wasn't just about wedding photos anymore. By the next sunset, I would learn the truth about my daughter-in-law and how deeply she had betrayed both my son and me. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching this from. What I'm about to share will make you question how well you really know the people closest to you. My name is Charles Anderson, and at 70 years old, I've learned that life teaches you patience, whether you want to learn it or not. I spent 35 years teaching shop class at Franklin High School here in Tennessee, watching teenagers wrestle with wood and stubborn nails. My hands are still rough from all those years, but steady enough to hold a coffee mug without shaking. Franklin, Tennessee isn't the kind of place that makes headlines. It's where folks still wave on Main Street, where the hardware store clerk remembers you prefer Phillips head screws, and where the courthouse clock runs 3 minutes slow, but nobody bothers fixing it. We like our imperfections here. They make a place honest. I live in the same white clapboard house Susan and I bought 42 years ago, with the wraparound porch she said looked like a postcard. After Susan passed 10 years ago, I thought about moving somewhere smaller, but this house holds too many memories. Besides, somebody's got to keep her rose bushes alive. Every morning starts the same way. Coffee at 6:30, black, with just a touch of sugar, sitting on the front porch watching Franklin wake up. Mrs. Patterson waves from her kitchen window. Jimmy the mailman stops to chat about the weather or the Titans. These small rituals matter when you're building a life around someone's absence. I spend afternoons in Susan's garden, though I don't have her green thumb. She could coax blooms from hopeless dirt, knew exactly when to water and when to let nature take its course. I do my best to honor what she built, even if half the roses lean like they can't decide which direction to grow. Sometimes I catch myself talking to her out there. The people in Franklin have been good to me since Susan's been gone. There's an unspoken understanding in small southern towns about widowhood. Neighbors bring casseroles without being asked. The ladies at First Baptist make sure I don't spend every Sunday dinner alone. It's the kind of community care that doesn't exist in bigger places. That's why when my phone rang at 7:30 on that Friday morning, cutting through my usual quiet routine, I knew something was different. The caller ID showed a Charlotte number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Eric Dawson, the photographer who'd captured my son Matthew's wedding just 3 months earlier. "Mr. Anderson," he said, and something in his tone made me set down my coffee cup. "I need to speak with you about something important. Could you drive up to Charlotte today?" Something in Eric's voice told me this wasn't about wedding photos anymore. My son Matthew has always been my greatest pride. At 35, he's everything Susan and I hoped he'd become when we first held him as a red-faced, squalling bundle at Franklin General Hospital. He's built himself a good life in Charlotte, North Carolina, about 300 miles east of here, working as a civil engineer for one of those big firms that designs bridges and highways. The kind of steady, honest work that pays well and makes a difference in people's lives. Every Sunday at 2 o'clock sharp, my phone rings. It's been that way for 10 years now, ever since Susan passed. Matthew made me a promise at her funeral, standing there in his black suit, with tears streaming down his face, that he'd call every week just like she used to remind him to do when he was away at college. "A son who remembers his parents is a son worth having," Susan used to say, and Matthew never forgot that lesson. He's got his mother's heart, that boy, always thinking about others before himself. When he was 12, he spent his entire summer allowance buying flowers for Mrs. Henderson down the street after her husband died, just because he noticed she looked sad. When he was 16 and working part-time at the hardware store, he'd slip extra screws or nails into older folks' bags without charging them, claiming there was a senior discount that didn't actually exist. Susan shaped him that way. She had this gentle but firm way of teaching right from wrong that never involved raising her voice. I remember coming home from school one afternoon to find Matthew sitting at the kitchen table, writing what looked like the same sentence over and over again. "What's he doing?" I asked Susan. "Learning that words matter," she replied. "He called Tommy Peterson a name at school today. Now he's writing, 'I will treat others with kindness' 50 times, and then he's going to walk over to Tommy's house and apologize in person." That was Susan's way. Consequences that taught lessons, not just punishment for the sake of it. The hardest part about losing her wasn't just the emptiness she left behind in our house. It was watching Matthew try to fill that space for me. Every Sunday call turned into an hour-long conversation where he'd ask about my health, whether I was eating properly, if I needed any repairs done around the house. During those first few months after the funeral, he'd drive down from Charlotte every other weekend, showing up with groceries and his toolbox, determined to take care of his old man. "Dad, you don't have to do everything yourself," he'd say, fixing a loose floorboard or cleaning out gutters I could have handled just fine. But I let him do it because I understood what he was really doing. He was trying to honor his mother by taking care of the man she'd loved for 40 years. Matthew never made me feel like a burden, never acted like those Sunday calls were an obligation. When he talked about his work, his friends, his life in Charlotte, there was always this underlying current of love and respect that reminded me Susan and I had done something right in raising him. He dated some over the years, brought a few nice girls home for holidays, but nothing ever seemed to stick. "I'm waiting for what you and Mom had," he told me once, and I understood exactly what he meant. Then one day he called with news that made my heart sing. Her name was Sienna Walsh, and she changed everything. "Dad, I met someone," Matthew had said during that Sunday call, and I could hear something different in his voice. Not just happiness, but wonder, like he'd discovered something he didn't know he'd been looking for. "Her name's Sienna, and I think she might be the one." At 32, Sienna Walsh was a financial advisor with one of Charlotte's premier investment firms, the kind of woman who could discuss market trends and make it sound like poetry. When Matthew described their first meeting at a professional conference downtown, he stumbled over his words like a teenager. She was giving this presentation about retirement planning, he told me, laughing. I was supposed to be learning about construction regulations, but I couldn't stop listening to her. She made compound interest sound fascinating. They'd started with coffee after the conference, then dinner the following week. Matthew would call with updates, his voice getting lighter each time. Sienna loved hiking Charlotte's trails. She made pasta from scratch. She'd never missed work in 3 years, but volunteered at the animal shelter every Saturday morning. "She's got this way of seeing the world, Dad," Matthew said one evening, like she notices things other people miss. She remembered our waitress mentioned her daughter's recital, and when we went back, Sienna asked how it went. Made that woman's whole day. I could hear Susan in those stories, the same attention to small kindnesses. When Matthew finally brought Sienna down to Franklin, I understood why my son had fallen so hard. She stepped out of his truck, wearing a simple blue dress and boots that had actually been walked in. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "Matthew told me your wife planted these roses," she said, walking to Susan's garden. "They're absolutely beautiful. You can tell they were planted by someone who really understood how to make things grow." That observation told me everything about her character. During dinner, she asked about my years teaching shop class, listened to stories about students who become carpenters and contractors. She didn't just make conversation, she made connection. "Your son talks about you both all the time," she said as we sat on the porch after dessert. "He says you taught him that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day." When she said that, I saw Susan's influence in Matthew's words passed down to this remarkable woman who'd captured his heart. That night, after they'd driven back to Charlotte, I sat thinking about how Susan would have loved Sienna's laugh, her questions about the garden, the way she'd insisted on helping clear the table. I could almost hear Susan saying, "That one's a keeper, Charles." When Matthew called 3 weeks later to say he was going to propose, I felt Susan smiling down on us. The engagement announcement came on a crisp October evening. She said, "Yes, Dad." Matthew's voice practically bounced through the phone line. He'd proposed at sunset on the observation deck of the Duke Energy Center in Charlotte, with the whole city spread out below them like a carpet of lights. I had this whole speech planned, but when I got down on one knee, all I could think to say was that I wanted to spend every Sunday for the rest of my life calling her my wife. Sienna had apparently laughed and cried at the same time, which Matthew took as the best possible response to a marriage proposal. Within a week, they'd set the date for the following spring and chosen Asheville, North Carolina, for the venue. Sienna had fallen in love with the idea of getting married in the Blue Ridge Mountains, surrounded by dogwood trees and rolling hills that reminded her of the fairy tale weddings she'd dreamed about as a little girl. "We found this incredible place called the Omni Grove Park Inn," she told me during their next visit to Franklin, her eyes lighting up as she described the resort's stone architecture and mountain views. "It's got these terraces that overlook the valley, and in April everything will be blooming." Her family insisted on handling the expenses, which turned out to be considerable. $65,000 for a weekend celebration that would host nearly 200 guests. When Matthew quietly worried about the cost, Sienna's father had waved him off. "You only get one chance to do this, right?" he'd said. "Besides, our little girl deserves everything she's ever dreamed of." I understood that sentiment completely. If Susan and I had been blessed with a daughter, I would have moved mountains to give her the wedding of her dreams. The months leading up to the ceremony flew by in a whirlwind of planning. Sienna handled most of the details with the efficiency of someone who managed investment portfolios for a living. Flowers, catering, music, photography. She coordinated everything with the precision of a military operation, but somehow managed to make it all feel personal and meaningful. Matthew, meanwhile, focused on the things that mattered most to him. He asked his college roommate to be his best man, chose readings that would have made Susan proud, and spent hours helping me pick out the perfect gift for his bride. For myself, I had only one important decision to make: what to wear. I'd been saving Susan's final gift to me for exactly this occasion. 3 months before she passed, she'd insisted on buying me a new suit for our 40th wedding anniversary, even though we'd planned nothing more elaborate than dinner at the Cracker Barrel. "Every man needs one really good suit," she'd said, running her hands over the charcoal gray wool. "Something that makes him feel like the distinguished gentleman I married." I'd worn it only once to her funeral, and then hung it carefully in the back of our closet, where it had waited patiently for another special occasion. As the wedding date approached, I found myself talking to Susan more often during my evening walks through her garden. I'd tell her about the menu Sienna had chosen, about Matthew's nervous excitement, about how I wished she could be there to see our boy start his new life. Sometimes I swore I could hear her voice in the wind through the rose bushes, reminding me that she would be there in every lesson she'd taught Matthew about love, and commitment. In every value we'd instilled in him about treating people with kindness and respect. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright like a blessing from above. The wedding day was everything we had dreamed of. The Omni Grove Park Inn looked like something from a magazine, with stone terraces carved into the mountainside and the Blue Ridge Mountains rolling into the distance. Dogwood trees were in full bloom, their white petals scattered like nature's confetti, and the April air carried the sweet scent of mountain laurel. Nearly 200 guests filled the terrace. I sat in the front row, wearing Susan's carefully chosen suit, feeling her presence so strongly I almost turned to look for her. When Sienna appeared at the top of the stone steps, my breath caught. She looked radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, glowing with pure joy. But it was Matthew's expression that nearly undid me. Standing in his black tuxedo, tears streaming as he watched his bride, he looked exactly like I had 42 years earlier, when Susan walked down the aisle. The ceremony was perfect in its simplicity. They'd written their own vows, promising to choose each other every day to build a life based on kindness and respect. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer echoed off the mountains like a celebration the whole world could hear. During the reception, I danced once with the bride, carefully and slowly. "Thank you for raising such a wonderful man," Sienna whispered. I spent the evening watching Matthew work the room, his arm never leaving his wife's waist, his face lit with happiness I hadn't seen since he was a child on Christmas morning. Driving back to Franklin that night, I whispered into the quiet car, "Susan, our boy, is in good hands." For 3 months after the wedding, life felt perfect. Matthew's Sunday calls were filled with stories about married life. They'd found their rhythm in their Charlotte townhouse with Sienna, cooking elaborate dinners and Matthew handling yard work. He'd send photos of weekend hiking trips to Crowder's mountain wine tastings in the Yadkin Valley, quiet dinners where they sat on the same side of the booth like proper newlyweds. "She makes me want to be better dad," he told me one evening. "Not because I'm not good enough, but because she deserves the best version of me." Sienna would occasionally join these calls, asking about my health, my garden, whether I needed anything from Charlotte. Her questions seemed genuine, the natural concern of a daughter-in-law, wanting to be part of the family. It was during one conversation that she first mentioned my finances. "Matthew told me you've been so wise with your retirement planning," she said, her voice warm with admiration. $220,000 is impressive for a teacher's pension and savings. You should be proud of how well you've managed everything. I thought it was sweet that Matthew had shared details about my financial security with his wife. It felt like natural transparency between a couple planning their future. Over the following weeks, Sienna would weave questions about my investments into our conversations. Did I have a financial advisor? Was my money earning good returns? Had I considered diversifying my portfolio? Her interest seemed caring, professional, even coming from someone whose job was helping people manage their money better. I should have known that perfect moments don't last forever. I had thought about all of this thoroughly by the time I drove to meet Eric that afternoon. Eric's studio in Charlotte felt heavy with secrets when I arrived. The confident photographer who had captured my son's wedding with such professional ease was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually neat beard was scruffy, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Anderson," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure you would." The 2-hour drive from Franklin had given me plenty of time to worry my mind, cycling through possibilities as I navigated the interstate traffic. His studio, normally organized and bright, felt different. Camera lenses scattered across his desk, lighting equipment pushed into corners, and an overwhelming sense that something had gone terribly wrong in this space. "Eric, son, what's this about?" I asked, settling into the chair he offered. "You've got me worried sick." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled his laptop closer and opened a folder labeled with Matthew and Sienna's wedding date. "I've been going through all the photos from the reception," he said, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard. "Sometimes clients want additional prints, or they notice someone in the background they want to identify. But when I was reviewing these..." The first photo appeared on his screen. Sienna in her wedding dress, but not on the dance floor or at the head table. She was standing near the service entrance of the venue, partially hidden by an ornamental column. Her arms were wrapped around a man in a dark suit, his hand resting at the small of her back, in a gesture that was unmistakably intimate. "That's not Matthew," I said, the words coming out flat and strange. "No, sir, it's not." Eric clicked to the next photo. "His name is Jeff Collins. According to the guest list, he's supposed to be Sienna's cousin. But the way they were holding each other, the way her head was tilted against his shoulder, the way his lips were pressed to her temple, this wasn't family affection. This was something else entirely. There are more, Eric said quietly, advancing through a series of timestamps. Sienna disappearing from the reception during the toasts. Jeff slipping out minutes later. Her return 20 minutes after that, hair slightly mussed, makeup touched up in a hurry. My chest felt tight, like someone was slowly tightening a vice around my ribs. Eric, I don't understand. Are you saying that they were... Mr. Anderson, I wish that was all I was saying. His voice cracked slightly. After I found these photos, I did some research. Jeff Collins isn't just her cousin. He's her business partner. They've been running the financial consulting firm together for 3 years, targeting elderly investors. The room seemed to tilt sideways. My mother... Eric continued, tears starting to form in his eyes. She trusted them with her retirement savings last year. $125,000. Everything she had saved from 40 years of working as a school secretary. They told her it was a guaranteed return investment. What happened to her money? Gone. All of it. And she died 6 months later, Mr. Anderson. Died thinking she'd failed herself, that she'd been foolish. She never knew she'd been deliberately targeted and robbed. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was crumbling away. The drive back to Franklin was the longest 2 hours of my life. I sat behind the wheel in a kind of stunned silence, my hands gripping tight enough to leave marks on the steering wheel, my mind struggling to process what Eric had shown me. The interstate stretched ahead like it always did, but nothing felt familiar anymore. The billboards I'd passed 1,000 times, the exit signs I knew by heart, even the radio playing softly in the background. Everything seemed to belong to a different world, one where my son's wife wasn't a criminal and my family wasn't built on a foundation of lies. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was setting behind Susan's oak tree, casting long shadows across the front porch. I sat in the truck for a long moment, staring at the house that had been my sanctuary for over 40 years, wondering how everything I thought I knew could have changed so completely in the space of a single afternoon. I didn't turn on any lights when I went inside. The darkness felt appropriate, somehow matching the heaviness that had settled in my chest like a stone. I made my way to the kitchen table by memory and sat down in the same chair where Susan used to pay bills, where Matthew had done his homework as a boy, where we'd shared thousands of quiet conversations about everything and nothing. The anger came first, hot and sharp, making my hands shake as I thought about Sienna's questions about my finances, her seemingly innocent interest in my retirement savings. She'd been sizing me up, calculating exactly how much she could steal from the man who'd welcomed her into his family with open arms. Then came the grief, deeper and more painful than the anger. Not just grief for the money Eric's mother had lost, but for the trust that had been shattered, for the innocence Matthew was about to lose, for the family dinners and Sunday phone calls that would never feel the same again. But mostly I felt afraid. Afraid for Matthew, who would have to learn that the woman he'd promised to love forever had married him as part of an elaborate con. Afraid of the conversation I'd have to have with him, the words that would break his heart and change everything he believed about his own judgment and his future. I found myself thinking about Susan, about the way she'd handled the difficult moments in our marriage and in raising Matthew. She never acted out of anger, never made important decisions when her emotions were running high. "Sleep on it, Charles," she used to say when I'd come home frustrated with a difficult student or upset about some problem at school. "The right answer will still be there in the morning, but it'll be clearer then." Susan would have known what to do in this situation. She would have found a way to protect Matthew without destroying him, to seek justice without seeking revenge. I couldn't call my son tonight, couldn't trust myself to have that conversation while my voice was still shaking with fury and my heart was still breaking for Eric's mother. Matthew deserved better than that. He deserved the truth delivered with love, not anger. But I also couldn't let Sienna continue her charade. Couldn't let her finish whatever plan she'd started when she'd asked about my savings account. Sitting there in the darkness of my kitchen, I made a decision that felt like the most important one I'd made since Susan's diagnosis, 10 years earlier. I would be patient. I would be careful. I would be smart. I wouldn't let her destroy one more life, not if I could stop it. Monday morning, I made the most important call of my life. I'd spent the weekend researching elder fraud, online learning terms I'd never wanted to know, and reading stories that made my stomach turn. By Sunday evening, I had a plan, or at least the beginning of one. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department had a financial crimes unit, and according to their website, they specialized in exactly the kind of scheme Eric had described. Financial Crimes Unit Detective Rodriguez speaking. Her voice was crisp, professional, and somehow reassuring. I took a deep breath and dove in. Detective, my name is Charles Anderson. I believe I'm the target of a financial fraud scheme, and I have evidence that the perpetrators have already victimized at least one other person. There was a pause, then the sound of a keyboard clicking. Mr. Anderson, can you come in today? I'd like to hear this in person. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a small conference room at the police station with Detective Karen Rodriguez, a woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Eric had driven up from Charlotte to join us carrying a folder, thick with printed photos and documents. This is more extensive than most elder fraud cases we see, Detective Rodriguez said after reviewing Eric's evidence. She spread the wedding photos across the table like pieces of a puzzle. Usually these operations target strangers, people they meet through cold calls or online, but this is personal, intimate, much more sophisticated. Eric had done his homework over the weekend too. He'd found records of Collins and Walsh Financial Consulting, a company that had been operating for 3 years with an office address that turned out to be a mail drop. He'd tracked down 2 other victims besides his mother, both elderly widows who'd lost their life savings to guaranteed investment opportunities. The pattern is consistent, Detective Rodriguez explained, pointing to a timeline Eric had created. They target people who are socially isolated, recently widowed, or have adult children who live far away. They build trust over months, sometimes years, before they make their move. But in my case, I said slowly, they built trust by marrying into the family. Exactly. Which makes you the perfect target. You trust Sienna because your son loves her. She has access to information about your finances through family conversations. And if something goes wrong, who's going to believe that your son's wife is a criminal? The detective leaned forward, her expression serious. Mr. Anderson, based on what Eric has shown me and what you've told me about Sienna's questions regarding your savings, I believe they're planning to target your entire retirement fund. You mentioned she knew about your $220,000 in savings. That's right. She seemed impressed by how well I'd managed my money. That's the setup. They're not looking to steal just part of your savings, Mr. Anderson. In every case we've documented, they take everything. They convince victims to move their entire nest egg into what they call high-yield investment opportunities that don't exist. The reality hit me like a physical blow. My entire retirement, everything Susan and I had saved, over 40 years of careful budgeting and modest living. What do we do? I asked. Detective Rodriguez exchanged a look with Eric. We set a trap. You're going to pretend to be the naive, trusting father-in-law they think you are. You're going to let Sienna believe she's successfully manipulating you into investing with their firm. She pulled out a small device about the size of a shirt button. This is a recording device. When you meet with Sienna, we'll capture everything she says. If she admits to the fraud scheme or tries to get you to sign over your money, we'll have enough evidence to arrest her and Collins. And you'll be there, close by. We can't be in the room. That would spook her. But we'll be monitoring everything, and we can move in the moment we have what we need. Eric reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder. Mr. Anderson, I know this is asking a lot, but you might be the only chance we have to stop them before they hurt someone else. I thought about Eric's mother dying in shame and confusion. I thought about Matthew unknowingly married to a woman who saw him as nothing more than a pathway to his father's bank account. What do I need to do? We had one shot to catch her, and I was the bait. Friday morning arrived with the weight of justice on my shoulders. I'd barely slept the night before running through the plan Detective Rodriguez had outlined, practicing the words I'd need to say. The recording device felt heavier than its actual weight as I clipped it inside my shirt pocket. Sienna's office was in one of Charlotte's newer business complexes, all glass and steel designed to project trustworthiness. She greeted me with the same warm smile I'd seen at family dinners, the same genuine seeming concern that had fooled me for months. Charles, I'm so glad you called, she said, guiding me to a conference table where papers were already laid out. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I really believe this opportunity could secure your future. She slid a folder toward me, filled with official-looking documents, showing projected returns that seemed too good to be true. Because they were. This is a limited-time investment opportunity, she explained. We're looking at moving $180,000 into an overseas growth fund that's been averaging 20% returns annually. 180,000, I asked, trying to sound uncertain. That's most of my savings. I know it seems like a lot, Charles, but that's exactly why it works. The minimum investment threshold ensures serious returns. She leaned forward earnestly. Think about it. In just 1 year, you could have over $200,000. How does it work exactly? It's simple. Your money gets pooled with other investors' funds, then circulated through our private network. The returns come from new investor contributions initially, but eventually everything balances out as the fund grows. Perfect, but I needed more. So the returns come from new investors? I asked. Have you done this before with other people? Her confidence grew. Oh yes, we have clients all over the Southeast. Just last year we helped a lovely widow from Charlotte invest her entire retirement savings. She was so grateful for the returns we promised her. What happened to her? Well, she passed away before she could see the full benefits, but her investment helped fund returns for our other clients. That's how the system works, Charles. It's beautiful in its simplicity. I felt sick, but I pressed on. And you're sure this is legal? Completely legal. We've been doing this for years. Jeff and I have perfected the system. She smiled that warm smile again. The best part is no one ever suspects family. Who's going to believe that your son's loving wife would steal from you? There it was, everything we needed. I set down the pen and looked directly into her eyes. You're right, Sienna. No one would believe it. Except I already do. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? I mean, I know about Eric's mother. I know about the other widows. I know about Jeff Collins, who isn't your cousin, but your partner in stealing from elderly people who trusted you. The mask slipped completely. Her face went cold, calculating. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. I touched my shirt pocket. Every word you just said has been recorded, including your confession about Eric's mother and your admission that you've been planning to steal my retirement savings. She lunged for the papers on the table, but it was too late. Detective Rodriguez and 2 uniformed officers walked through the door. Sienna Walsh, you're under arrest for financial fraud, elder exploitation, and securities violations. Her transformation was terrifying. The caring daughter-in-law vanished, replaced by pure rage. You bastard, she screamed, struggling against the officers. You think you're so smart. You have no idea what you've done. Matthew will never forgive you for destroying his marriage. No, Sienna, I said quietly. Matthew will never forgive you for lying to him every single day since you met him. As they dragged her away, still screaming threats, Jeff Collins was being arrested in the parking lot. Their scheme was over. The hardest conversation of my life came 3 days later, when I had to tell Matthew the truth. He listened in stunned silence, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally deep sadness. Dad, I'm so sorry, he said. I brought her into our family. I put you in danger. Son, you love someone who wasn't worthy of it. That's not a character flaw. That's proof you have a good heart. Today, 6 months later, Matthew visits more often. We sit on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes just enjoying the quiet. He's healing, learning to trust his judgment again. As for me, I've learned that patience isn't weakness, and sometimes the greatest act of love is waiting for the right moment to act. Looking back on this true story, I realize I made mistakes that nearly cost my family everything. Don't be like me. Don't ignore the warning signs when someone asks too many questions about your finances, even if they're family. These grandpa stories aren't just entertainment. They're lessons learned the hard way. When Sienna first started asking about my retirement savings, I should have been more cautious. God gave us instincts for a reason, and mine were screaming that something wasn't right. The truth is, this true story could have ended very differently. If Eric hadn't found those photographs, Sienna might have succeeded in stealing everything Susan and I had saved. God works through people like Eric, putting the right person in the right place at the right time. My advice from these grandpa stories: trust but verify. Love your family, but don't let that love make you naive. When someone starts showing unusual interest in your money, ask questions. Do your research, and pray about it, because God's wisdom is always available to those who seek it. These grandpa stories teach us that patience and wisdom often triumph over deception and greed. I could have confronted Sienna immediately, but waiting allowed us to gather evidence needed to stop her from hurting others. Sometimes the hardest thing is also the right thing. The real victory wasn't seeing Sienna arrested. It was protecting Matthew's future and preventing other families from experiencing what Eric's mother went through. This true story reminds us that evil often wears a familiar face, but good people working together can overcome even the most sophisticated deception. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below telling me what you learned, and don't forget to subscribe for more meaningful stories. Your support helps me keep sharing these important lessons one story at a time.